Hello, everyone. Welcome to the No Zoo Lines podcast. My name is Ari Nazan, and I'm joined by my good friend Chad Lyman. And welcome to episode 4. We are very happy how the previous episodes have gone. We've got a lot of feedback, and we're going to keep moving forward, talking about police combatives, jiu-jitsu, training methodologies. So welcome. And today we're going to be talking about, does grappling matter for police training? Now, this is something that's come up. In previous years, decades ago, grappling was not part of our training. It was something that happened maybe 2% of the time, and everything else was weapons-based strikes and really, really crappy control. So we're going to talk about, is grappling systems a must for police agencies? And on top of that, we also are going to talk about that grappling is not enough for training. So you do need a kind of mix in there. We're going to talk about how it was has evolved over the last few years. And question I'm going to throw at Chad is Police Jiu Jitsu its own art now? So welcome, Chad. Let's get into it right away. And so let's just talk about it. Do you think, or why must all police systems have a grappling component?
Yeah, I think it's just because the job demands it. I did not come from a grappling background. I'm not a BJJ guy from youth, not a wrestler from youth. I think the job demands it. Your job at its core, if I were to ask a police officer to describe to me the typical arrest for a misdemeanor battery on someone, a theft. I stole some stuff from the store. You're contacting someone on a person stop and you run them and they have a warrant. And you've already patted them at the beginning of the stop. You're relatively sure they're not armed. They're not attempting to fight with you, but they're empty hand. And let's say they even begin to resist now.
Mm-hmm.
So the basic job description is I need to get someone into a position where I can apply handcuffs to them. So I've got to position them. I need to control them in a manner that allows me to safely put handcuffs on them. Now, through compliant cuffing, they could get set up on their own. And we could do that standing. And you don't need any grappling for compliant people. You don't need striking. You don't need some made up self-defense system. You don't need your gun for the compliant person who goes ahead and turns around, faces away, separates their feet, puts their hands where you tell them to put their hands. Whether you're applying a cuffing system that you put one cuff on and bring the other hand back and cuff, which I don't think that's a whole nother thing, or whether you're controlling both hands and cuffing. Whatever you're using on the compliant person, you don't need any DTs other than good positioning and then a handcuffing trained system and then some control and then applying the cuff. If once this person says, I'm not going to cuff up, and they're not armed visually, they haven't armed themselves, and let's say they're just resisting being cuffed, you have to, it demands grappling. So yeah, I think it's silliness that for people to argue that you shouldn't be grappling.
So how did we as a police, as a profession, go so long without introducing grappling to our job? Like, what did it look like when you got on the job? So you've been on the job way longer than me. What was a typical arrest that went south look like, actually?
Well, the ones that went south were just the polyester pile, the pig pile, whatever you called it, your agency. It's just a pile of guys, man. We're just doing whatever we can do. Because here's the other interesting thing is people will say, well, it's dangerous to grapple. Don't fight on the ground. I don't know a department in the nation, in the US, that you're resisting empty-handed, either through pushes, pulling your arms away, punching. I don't know a department in the US that doesn't take that person to the ground. We've done more and more wall work over the years, but nobody trained me in that originally on PDs. My PDs adopted my curriculum for walls or objects. They literally had me write the vehicle extraction lesson plan that us and other companies in the space use components of.
Mhm.
So, we weren't even training that. So all we were training is do the handcuffing on the ground. And that would look very untrained, very crazy. I've related before that I actually got handcuffed to a subject in a pig pile
Yeah.
early in my career where his hand got cuffed and then they cuffed my hand thinking it was his other hand. And that was a pain in the butt because he never stopped fighting. We had to pin him down, pin his arm down, pin my arm down. The cuff was going like this. On my arm, we had to get the little cuff key in there and undo it. It was quite an ordeal. They had to kneel on my arm and kneel on his arm, if you can imagine that in your head, and then
Right.
work the handcuff key. Um, and then he had one cuff on and was in a fight with us for a small amount of time until we got him under control and then cuffed. But yeah, I was untrained. How about for you early on?
So we talked about this last episode. More cops are now training than ever. So it's awesome to see. You can immediately see when someone's been training just on how they maneuver and how they hold. But there's still a large percentage of our industry that doesn't do any grappling whatsoever. So those old school days are still with us. So I wouldn't even say, I started 11 years ago, but I still see it today. People who are not confident in their hands-on ability. So it ends up being the push-pull. I just had one of my students, actually, this is a funny story. So she said, hey, I just had this arrest. I had a guy in an escort. He started struggling. I went to an arm hug. She's a very small officer. And she said, had it in that kind of that Russian. And I went down and immediately I felt him go down. And I'm like, fantastic. And I was waiting for the story to get better. And then she goes, but another officer came in on the other arm and then just yanked him out of my arm and pulled him the opposite direction. So he was going down. He had one hand based on the ground. Other officer pulled him off, and now she's lost control and the fight is on again. So 50% of it worked well. But that's the thing. We are often screwing each other up because we're jumping in and it turns into that polyester pile or just untrained. I think actually police officers, I'm a massive advocate when someone goes, Chad, I got this, just get the legs and you have that verbal command. We don't do that enough. And it's like, I am controlling the upper torso. I am fine. Don't screw this up. This is what I need. And that doesn't happen enough.
Yeah, that doesn't happen enough. And I believe historically, if you look at the old DT manuals, they were boxing, they were doing judo, and they were wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And it's my theory that we got away from that when Americans, and there's a theory, I don't know this, but at some point we moved away from it. And I think what happened is we had guys go to Vietnam or Korea and some of these other places. We had an influx, I know for sure in American policing, we had an influx with military guys. Back in the day out of those conflicts, and then we've had a second influx out of military guys in modern times from modern conflicts here in the States. I think those guys in the 60s, 70s, who had done some work overseas and stuff, were in the military, I think they were learning a lot of more kicking, punching, that kind of thing. And I think they got away from early policing. And you had a lot of aikido, you had pressure point systems that became very, very popular. I'm going to push on these areas and inflict discomfort or pain. And then through that discomfort or pain, I'm going to gain compliance. You had that kind of thing, a lot of aikido. I think aikido gets a bad name because, for example, I've seen you do, and it's not aikido, it's Japanese Jujutsu, if I understand correctly. I've seen you use that very, very effectively for control. And then when you don't get compliance standing, but you gain some control, you'll execute takedowns off of initial control holds that are Japanese Jiu-Jitsu based. the only challenge I see with either an aikido base or a Japanese Jujutsu or whatever we want to say it is that is a very specific art form that's not normal for most of the people walking around. Now, the upside of that is other people wouldn't know it routinely, but the downside is you're going to have to teach every cop from step zero how to become competent. Now, that's what people use against jujitsu some. But if you watch a fight between two untrained people,
Mhm.
they're going to try to punch each other, they're going to try to clinch each other, and they're going to roll around ineffectively on the ground. So I could take two untrained guys right now, and they're not going to Japanese jujitsu each other. They are going to wrestle and get in positions that we could then teach them the proper way to utilize those positions through wrestling and jujitsu. So I think, I came from a background where I got into street fights growing
Mhm.
up because of the neighborhood I lived in. I was not unfamiliar with throwing a punch or grabbing a guy and wrestling him to the ground, muscling him down. So now you take those components of what I've done and you add details to them, you add principles to them, you fine tune those, and now I'm doing those, and it's not totally foreign to me. So that's kind of some thoughts I have on the evolution. The last thing I'll say on this, and I'll flip it back over to you. One of the interesting things in the States is our modern soldiers who've gone to modern conflicts have gotten into like Marine Corps, mixed martial arts, or the Air Force's version, or the Army's version, Army combatives.
Mhm.
Those systems have gone back to MMA and Jiu-Jitsu. They've gone away from Krav or karate or kung fu or whatever they were doing before. And they moved away from those things. So those soldiers coming back to us, those guys are familiar with what we're trying to instill in people in modern policing. And those systems are more of a mixed approach. Striking, clinch, and wrestling, and ground wrestling, striking, and jujitsu. So
Now, to speak to your point about the Japanese Jiu-Jitsu thing, it's very interesting. So, in my personal opinion, and this is going to rub some people the wrong way, that's fine, but this is my personal experience. Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and the Aikido stuff, it takes a very long time to get good at it, to apply it in a real life situation. Is it impossible to use on the street? Absolutely not. I have seen it. I know people who are high level Aikido people that have worked very well, Japanese Jiu Jitsu, but it takes a long time. BJJ and grappling is a more gross motor skill. Comes more naturally to people. There's less nuances and fine motor skills. So that is why it is a perfect art to learn. Now, my Japanese jiu-jitsu got better because I started learning BJJ. On the flip side, my BJJ is better because of my Japanese jiu-jitsu. So I make a joke to all my jiu-jitsu people. It's like, what style do you train? And I said, well, it's all jiu-jitsu to me. And they said, well, what's the difference between the two? And I say, well, Japanese jiu-jitsu, 80% like this, 20% like this. BJJ, 80% like this, 20% like this. I mean, that's a gross oversimplification. I've said this tons before, but it has helped me on how to understand how the body works. And I think when I watch you teach and I watch other high level guys teach, it's not about the moves anymore. We talk about concepts, but it's understanding how the body moves and how to manipulate it. In the middle of a roll, I can do something. It's not a move that I've ever seen, but I understand how the body moves. And that is a bonus to spending hours on the mat and twisting people up and being twisted up. So that's the bonus for a grappling system. And that's why we need to do it in policing, because when we go hands on, we are in close proximity with the bad guy.
yeah. So I've got a coworker named Russ Metke. He'll probably listen to this at some point. He's retired now. But you and Russ are two guys that I know in a live go with a resistive bad guy. You guys can find wrist locks and use them to take people down. Um, and Russ is the same as you. And so uh, when I see you guys operate, in my mind, you just have additional tools that other guys don't have. And so it's not bad to acquire those things. But to your point, and I think Russ would agree, for us to teach Vegas Metro, uh, we have 4,000 cops, but some of those are admins, some of those are different spots. The COs and POs are two different groups.
Mm-hmm.
On the PO side, there's probably 2,000 or something on the PO side, right? Well, we got to get all them through training every year.
Yeah.
Out of that 2,000, there's very few, but I also want to stay away from, because they'll make the same argument against jujitsu or any kind of training. Oh, you got to train so long to get good at it. So part of our message is you need to train consistently over time, and that means you'd have to train on your own time. So I'm not a fan of saying, well, it's too hard to teach, so we can't teach it.
Mm.
I just believe, kind of one of your earlier points where you said, hey, the wrestling and the jujitsu is more universal, for lack of a better word. It's more applicable right now. And so I believe that ought to be your foundation. You ought to be really, really good at wrestling. You ought to be really, really good on the ground at both wrestling and jujitsu, so that you're able to pin people in bad positions, you're able to escape bad positions, and you're not going to get finished in these bad positions as easily as if you weren't competent. So I really believe that's important. And I just believe the path to competence, as niche as wrestling and jiu-jitsu are,
Mm-hmm.
there's far more guys who could use wrestling and jiu-jitsu in a fight right now on demand than could use Japanese Jujutsu. Japanese Jujutsu is even more niche.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to go more niche. I want to find a mainline thing. You also said some of the senior guys will say, oh, is this a new thing? Is this a new thing? And I would say yes to that, until, here's why I know the train we're currently on, which is, hey, people should train jujitsu with some mixed applications. And we're going to talk about this more in the podcast, but have a strong grappling base, basically grappling base. Here's a reality. To do our job effectively, I need to control a person, both movement wise and positional wise. I need to manipulate their positioning into a very specific position up against a wall or against the ground. And I need to extract their arms behind them. There is literally, by definition, you're grappling and you're entangling, literally by definition. Like there's no other way to do that. I'm not so married to wrestling and jujitsu that if there was some magical way to do that, that I didn't have to use wrestling or jujitsu, I'd be like, okay, I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is it works. It's super effective. Literally, it's what we're doing. Like, how do you through controlled holds Krav Maga someone into custody? How do you through controlled holds Taekwondo someone into custody? How do you through controlled holds box someone into custody? How do you Muay Thai them into custody? Like, through controlled holds on a person who's unarmed, who's resisting, but
Yeah.
they're armed. And then that resistance is scalable. And we'll talk about that more as we go. But this is never going away, because it literally is what we do.
I came from a traditional martial art background first, and then I came into BJJ, and I was like, I need to learn more. But I've run into people who've gone, I've done 25 years of karate or insert whatever traditional art, and I'm so into it that I can't let it go to become a white belt again, BJJ, to add to my skill set. And so they will go to the grave saying, this is the only way to do it, and you just are not doing it well enough. Does that make sense? You know what I mean? Like, it
Yeah.
it happens. And I think
Yeah.
the biggest win for me was to go, I need to put a white belt on and learn how to grapple and do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because that's going to make me a better martial artist. And it did.
Yeah. Yeah. And there are a lot of guys who struggle with that and won't do that. I mentioned Russ earlier. Russ His stand-up game was crazy good.
Hmm.
Taekwondo, also Muay Thai, very, very good kicks, very dynamic striker. And he would get right in there and grapple and work with those of us who were jujitsu guys more so,
Hmm.
or straight MMA guys. And he improved over the years and still is working on improving today. But yeah, guys like you, not everyone will do it, you know. Another argument I see for grappling nowadays is the optics. And you almost have the police apologist BJJ guy who says, well, I want to apply BJJ because I don't want, I don't want to have to hit anyone, and we're gonna apply it. And Henner will use this in his marketing. He'll say, we're controlling these people without hurting them, and I've controlled more people than him without hurting him because I believe his number is 0 for arrest, and I've had hundreds of arrests where
Right.
I used position and BJJ and wrestling to not injure someone, and those are good. I also seek that, but that's not why I'm doing it. The reason those didn't result in injury is a person felt dominated. They felt like I was going to finish them, and they quit and they give up. And that's okay. I want them to give up. I want compliance. I want grappling is a de-escalation tool, but not because it's kind, not because it's nice. Grappling is a de-escalation tool because it presents strength to your opponent. You feel strong. Your position feels strong. The weight you're putting on them feels strong.
Mm.
The way you grab them, to get grabbed by a guy who wrestles or does jits, is different than to get grabbed by a guy who even lifts weights. So the way I grab people is different, right? So it's not the deterrence of jujitsu is not kindness. Now, the offshoot of that is because it is control based and not damage based until it's time to do damage. And because they quit, because they feel dominated, the offshoot is that injuries are down. And I'm good with that. I want that. But it's mislabeled.
Mm.
Oh, look how kind I'm going to be to these people who are resisting, and look how kind. I'm not studying it. And by the way, I started in 1998, and in 98, I could choose my front kick or a clinch and a takedown. In 98, if I told you to come in front of my car and you said no, and I said get in front of my car, and you said no, I'd be putting my gloves on. And by the time the second glove got on, if you weren't in front of my car, it was now a physical fight. And in 98, the rule was always stay one level ahead. So if he's trying to grab you, you're punching him in the face. If he pulls a weapon system, I pull a bigger one. That was how we did policing in 98 and into the early 2000s. That was when I began to switch to grappling, is in that environment. So I wasn't in 2001, I wasn't running on in a heavy gang and gun neighborhood in a 2-man car. I wasn't driving around going, man, I just really want to take these people into custody, and I don't want to hurt anyone. I want to be nice. I wasn't thinking that. I wasn't thinking I wanted to hurt them. I was thinking I want to dominate these people
Mm.
to the point they don't want to fight me. I want them to think twice. I want them to reconsider. I want them to be compliant. If they would just be compliant, I would never touch them other than to handcuff them. I want them compliant. And so I switched to a grappling base before I ever had to for optics. So I reject this modern argument and jujitsu people saying, well, this will help cops not be excessive. Utter nonsense for the most part. For the most part. Now, if I'm in more control, if I'm more confident, if I'm more competent, and if I'm more calm, I would readily admit that's a recipe for success. And that's a recipe for safer uses of force. And that is a recipe to prevent excessive force, however rare it may be. We want to prevent it always. That is a recipe to prevent that. But I started doing the jujitsu thing long before, and one of the things that I think Older guys, they think it's another buzzword for the
Mm.
administration. So I think some of the pushback is, oh, we're all getting soft. We're going to cuddle these guys. No, I'm going to get in such a dominant position. This dude thinks he's going to get his face ripped off. That's what's happening. I'm putting so much controlled position and pressure on this person that they are physically and mentally breaking and complying with me prior to me needing to actually break them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the power of it. And that's why it's never going away. But I think sometimes the optics argument makes it unattractive to the outsiders. And I think those of us who utilize it need to say, no, I am typically going to use less force. There is typically going to be less injury, but that's a result of me being dominant. This is not an exchange. This is not a back and forth.
And to be fair, if there are administrators that are listening to this podcast, we actually have numbers now and stats of how grappling has been introduced to police departments, and it has lowered injury to officers and to suspects. So it's not anecdotal anymore. We are actually finding, because we're a stat-driven profession. And if you want to see those stats, we have them on the Invictus site. They're around more and more coming out, and they're not like a 2-month study. Like Marietta did like a 3-year study. Like it's over years.
I
So
did a 3-year study.
yeah,
Mesa.
Mesa, right? That's the other one. So it's a real thing. So it's no longer fantasy. Okay.
De-escalation is such an important part of modern policing. If 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 de-escalation is going to be more than I'm going to plead with someone or talk to them or ask them to do something 72 times, if that's all de-escalation means, well, then once that fails, then it's just time to wreck this person.
Right.
But that's not true. Grappling allows us to physically communicate in an effective and relatively controlled injury rate de-escalation. And if you're going to de-escalate beyond just showing up and asking the person to do something, and then once they don't, because de-escalation really happens when the bad guy changes his behavior.
Mm.
If it's only based on verbals, well, then it's a fake thing. But grappling allows me to de-escalate beyond verbal commands with my subject. The blessings of grappling are the curses. If we're training grappling into our DT systemology, it is basically control and position, right? And then through verbal commands or maybe being able to extract arms or something, we can get to cuffing, even if the person's still resistant. But they can resist grappling effectively if they can counter grapple, or potentially through striking, or potentially through accessing weapon systems, right?
Right.
It's not a catch-all. It's not the only thing you need. So the blessings of grappling that we promote are generally better outcomes for the officer and for the bad guy, less injury, more control, more effectiveness. By its very nature, that means you're not finishing people and you're not injuring them. So even if I get in a bad position grappling wise, if you're the police officer, you put me in a bad position, but I'm not done resisting and I begin to fight hard, grappling can't be your only answer, because you're never going to finish me in a law enforcement setting. Like many places have outlawed carotid restraint, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So some people will say, well, I'll just hold him there till he gets tired. You might. It depends on who you're holding. There's certain dudes that I can't hold there until they get tired.
Yeah.
And one of them, even Henner says, hey, we'll just hold him here. I don't believe I can hold Henner until he gets tired. I don't believe I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
I believe he's skilled enough. I believe he's physical enough. I don't think Henner's breaking the law. I don't think I'm ever going to need to arrest him.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the point of this. But I don't think I can hold that guy in a position for an undetermined amount of time till he just decides. And I don't believe he would use his energy in a way that he wouldn't still have energy in 7 minutes of being in that spot. So we do need other options, other tools, because the reality of the fight we're in, you need knowledge of striking. You need to be able to strike effectively. You need knowledge of weapon systems, counters to weapon systems, and the ability to deploy your own weapon systems and use them. And using a weapon system in an entangled environment is much different than using it in space. So what are some things you think of?
No, I think there's a misnomer. They talk about jujitsu. It's like jujitsu is just grappling. Jujitsu isn't just grappling. There are,
Yes.
like, even if you look at Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, I come from Keitho and Pedro Sauer, Hickson Gracie lineage. And so we have the whole self-defense. It's very rudimentary, I'll be honest,
Sure.
which is taken from the judo Goshin stuff. And that needs to be updated. That's why I'm a massive proponent for updating the stand-up self-defense stuff. And that's why I love the PJJ stuff that I'm seeing, because we are being presented with things every day going, okay, we need to troubleshoot this because this is real life. This isn't someone going, I'm attacking like this, Chad. That doesn't happen. So that's why that needs to be evolving as well. Because you look at the BJJ ground stuff, and every day something genius is coming out. People are putting their minds to it. It's awesome. But I think that we need the striking element. We need the throwing element, the weapon entangle element. And this leads me to think that, well, PJJ, Police Jiu Jitsu, is actually its own art now because we have specific rules that we must follow. Let's just talk about PJJ. Is it its own art now?
I think so. I think of it that way. It, 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 are there others that are similar? Sure, but it's really based on, especially North American policing and dealing with everything you deal with there, for sure. And that's the way I approached it. I approached it for, hey, what is this fight? What do I need for this fight? And I kind of got it from coaching in the combative arena. When I have a student getting ready for IBJJF gi tournament,
Mm-hmm.
which is even a student getting ready for like an EBI no-gi. Those are wildly different tournaments, wildly different things are going to get emphasized and allowed. Those are different skill sets. Then if you have someone who's doing combat jiu-jitsu versus IBJJF, now I have a guy doing MMA versus a guy doing Naga. All these are different combat arenas where we're going to combine elements of different things depending on the rules, what are the outcomes or the goals, what are we, how do we win, how do we keep from getting finished, all those things. So I think in my mind, that's how I develop police jiu-jitsu is
Mm-hmm.
what am I doing at work every day? What are my tool sets? What am I bringing into this fight? And what kind of fights am I getting in? And what's the outcome? What's the goal of the fight? What are the rules of the fight? And those rules could be use of force case law. It could also be SOPs, very unique to your own department. All those kind of things. So absolutely, I think of it that way. And I think of it as you have to be well-rounded. You have to be able to do everything competently. I've got to be able to stand and strike competently. I've got to be able to clinch wrestle competently. I've got to be able to strike in the clinch, get to weapon systems in the clinch. I've got to be able to make space to get to my weapon systems. I've got to be able to defend takedowns, get takedowns, fight on the ground, and do all that on the ground too. It can't be
Mm-hmm.
one dimensional. Grappling is not enough. And where grappling, the biggest indicator of this, I mean, no one's really going to argue that grappling is enough, except for maybe some BJJ guys that don't understand really what we're doing. But like cops like you and I who do both, we do jujitsu and we do law enforcement. We're not going to make the argument grappling is enough. One of the reasons we're so loud and vocal in our argument is grappling is not intuitive. You don't naturally know how to do it, and we don't train it. So the reason we bang that drum so loud is we are doing weapon stuff, typically as an agency, even if it's
Mm-hmm.
not the best. We are doing some striking as an agency, even if it's not the best. I don't know any police departments that don't do, they may not hit each other in practice because they don't know how to do it safely. But all of them are striking as part of their use of force, however their use of force model, whatever they use, strikes are on there. So I don't know if any police department says, oh, you can never kick or punch someone.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there's SOPs on how and when we do it and which ones we're going to do and targeting areas, all that stuff. But the one thing, and people will talk about takedowns or talk about control on the ground, but they don't train it. And so I think the reason we're so loud about grappling is it's not trained, but it's not enough. Another indication of this is just MMA.
Yeah.
Early MMA, when it was truly, it's going to be this thing or this thing. Okay, that's the early MMA. You're going to be doing jujitsu versus boxing.
Okay.
Well, then it was enough for that time because no one knew grappling. And that was the one no one knew. And those guys won the early UFCs because no one understood grappling. But as soon as people started to mix a little bit, it's not even enough in the UFC anymore. It would be laughable for an IBJJF world champion black belt in the gi to not cross-train and just say, okay, I'm now going to wear my IBJJF gi into the octagon like they did in the early days when no one knew grappling. I'm now going to do that. And I'm going to be successful. I'm not going to train anything else. And I'm going to go win fights. You couldn't do that at local AMI shows in Vegas. If you showed up and you wore the gi and you had done no wrestling, you'd done no striking, and you got an AMI competitor in Las Vegas, someone who's got maybe 3 fights, and he's a blue belt or a purple belt, you're going to get your butt kicked. That kid's going to wreck you.
Mm-hmm.
And he's wearing shorts, nothing else, gloves, So no, grappling's not enough, not even in sport.
So I'm going to throw something out. I just thought about it, but there's some people say, hey, police jiu-jitsu, you're talking about it's a different art, but can someone come into policing with just jiu-jitsu or some MMA experience? Will they be able to apply it? So you got two guys at Metro that come up to my mind right away. You got John Alessio and you got Josh Haynes, both guys who are had being elite level jiu-jitsu guys and MMA guys. Now they come into the police because they're now cops. Is there a problem being a strict MMA or BJJ guy coming into policing? Could they use their stuff on the average citizen while doing the job?
1,000%.
Yes.
Yeah. They've 2 shining examples. John has done, both of them have done very well. Josh has gone the detective and the supervisor route just by choice.
Yep.
John's gone the operator route, and John's on an elite team for us that all they do is hunt serious bad guys who are currently wanted for violent, brutal crimes.
Yeah.
That's all he does at all for our agency. And he leads training their guys and taking people into custody. No, absolutely 2 of our stars. Can I give another example of that? You know that we went to the UFC PI the other day. I took a group of officers over there. Cody Garbrandt, who held the belt in his weight class for a period of time and has been a top 10 competitor in the UFC for a lot of his career. Still very, very dangerous. Grew up in Ohio, has a boxing and wrestling background. And then a guy named Alex Perez, who's the number 6 flyweight or feather flyweight, I think, in the world right now. He's got like 30 plus fights. Alex is out of California, and Alex has family who are law enforcement. So the UFC and these guys volunteer to do a seminar for our guys. So Cody and Alex say to me, well, what do you want us to teach? And we're not sure how to incorporate all the cop stuff in. I said, don't incorporate any cop stuff in. Teach them good fundamental stuff. Show them how and why something works. You've got an hour and a half, and now add some change to coach them.
Yeah.
Stay narrow on a track. And I said, I want you to either show them how, if they get taken down, how to mitigate damage and work their way all the way back up to their feet, mitigating damage, meaning not taking striking damage, or starting on their feet, working to a clinch, taking someone down, then control them from top.
Mm.
They go, well, they didn't even tell me which one they're going to do. What they chose was clinch to take down to top control and to get someone turned belly down. And they just got guys, they worked into the clinch first, then they worked their takedown, which was a body lock variation, something similar to what we would do. And then they got someone belly down, and then they kind of knee split their legs. They stapled the leg and had a leg down the middle, and they were pinning their hips down. And that's how they would end. So over the course of the seminar, it took our guys from standing to some drilling, and then adding to that, drilling an arm drag, then adding to that a body lock, off the body lock, a single takedown to a single control. And they showed, hey, once you're here, the guy might turtle on a turtle breakdown, spiral ride.
Yeah.
Underneath claw, spiral ride, run towards the head, flatten them out, begin to extract arms, which is something we already do. But they didn't extract the arms the way we would at Metro necessarily for handcuffing. So they do their whole seminar. I don't interject at all. I just watch Cody and Alex do this. And you said earlier, so I didn't give them any direction, like, oh, don't do this, don't do this. Because I know they're just going to show my guys some skill sets. And they definitely understand how to do this stuff. And I'm hoping, they're both smaller guys. And we had guys, Cam Cousins was there, and we had guys bigger than Cam there. So we had some big cops there. Mm-hmm. And then a bunch of medium-sized guys like me. So I know that Cody and Alex are going to show my guys how to fundamentally be sound. And so I'm not even worried about it. And you said earlier, it's not about the moves. And it's not. At one point, and I videoed it, and I'm going to post it, Alex starts talking about, they're asking him for details on exactly where their arms go and stuff like this. And it's not my brown belt and black belts in the room that are asking this. It's my guys. We had five guys who have never trained come to this seminar. So it's a win, right? Mm-hmm. So we had 5 people who have never trained outside the academy at a gym come to this seminar because we had it at the UFC. 5 of the participants. The other guys all trained somewhere. And they varied from a couple white belts, blue belts, to a couple really good guys. Cam Cousins, Sal Wallace, a few of my guys who are savages. They're really good. Anyway, the guys who are really good were not asking technical questions. Like where exactly does this go? Where does this go? And the devil can be in the details. Sometimes you do have to clean up a technique. But my point is, the guys who don't train were looking for like a magical way that they're just going to touch here and it's going to work. But my guys who train weren't looking for that. And Alex at one point says to the guys, this is all about distance management. Where's my head? Am I winning inside position with my arms? Does any of this sound familiar to you and I? Am I creating an angle? Who's winning the inside position? Who's dominating the space? Who's controlling the space? Where's my head position? He goes, if I'm winning these things, I'm winning the fight. He goes, now I can manifest that several different ways. We're showing you a way. But he goes, he launches right into this beautiful thing on inside position. It's about 45, 50 seconds long, and I taped it. So I'm going to post it. Just editing it earlier today. I haven't gotten to it. But here's a guy from the UFC who has 30 plus fights, who's a professional athlete, talking to a room full of cops, telling them exactly what they need. And
So
so
good.
that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of what we're doing. Both Cody and Alex both have a heavy striking background and they strike a lot when they fight. But
Hmm.
both of them said, we win or lose, we go out on our shield by controlling range, by controlling the distance, by being able to change the pace of the fight, by getting to good spots. We win and lose our fights that way. These are two champion guys. Now, all we do as cops is we're not agreeing, we're not shaking hands and agreeing to fight over a space of time. We're going to get right to the part where we're going to counter everything and counter damage. And we're going to stay there for that fight.
Yeah.
And we're going to trip, get into another position. And we're just going to be really deliberate about what we're doing.
It sounds like you and I both agree that grappling does matter in police combatives, and it's obviously not the only thing we need, but it is a massive component. I would say, I would go on a limb and say it's probably the most important thing. Not the only thing, but everything does fall under that. So, is there any other things you want to add before I move to the lion's share and I throw something at you again?
Yeah, I've got a couple of things that I
Okay.
think are really important when we think of grappling. There's no way to lie to yourself. I could run really fast and think that's going to help me in a fight. I could run really far in training runs and think that's going to help me in a fight. And by the way, I'm not saying it wouldn't. I could bench press 300 plus pounds, which I've done in my lifetime, and think that's going to help me in a fight. And I did. I could tell myself, I've just got the will to win. I know I've got this mental edge that no one else has. You can't lie on the mat. You could say whatever you want to say to me before we shake hands. And then we start going. There's no more lying. And it's freeing. So there's no way to lie to yourself about who you are or who you aren't. Now that doesn't mean that if you're not, and here's the other place that grappling becomes such a blessing that I think it has to be a part of police curriculums. I can develop an indomitable spirit, which means I believe I'm going to win. And still, but I know it's possible that I could lose. An indomitable spirit, we're called the Nozu lions. Uh, I I say male African lions have indomitable spirit. When they go into fights, their head is up. They are going into the fight with some confidence, with some courage, with some competence, but they're fighting other worthy adversaries and they don't always win. So grappling gives me that because even in times where it's getting put to me, um, gains in grappling are very, very small. I don't get finished as fast. A certain guy doesn't finish me the same
Yes.
way anymore. Um, New guys come and I'm mauling them. I'm starting to gain this truth about myself that doesn't come from punching a bag. I could do heavy bag workouts and just be a savage on the mitts, man. Uh, but still not be able to fight effectively. Grappling, you learn so much about yourself. And you even learn, even when I'm even when I'm tired, I can fight. Even when I'm not in the best position, I can fight. Even when there's all these things you learn that are directly attributable to being in a backyard and being tired at the end of a foot pursuit. The other thing that grappling gives us, great cardio and strength and conditioning.
Mhm.
Once again, I've never been, even now, like guys will tell me I still feel really strong. And I haven't lifted weights for numbers in years. I just lift reps really light. If I can't do 10 to 20 reps, I'm not doing a weight. Tough. You get really great at being able to move humans. And that's what the job requires. A 1 rep max on your bench press will not translate the same way as being able to wrestle and set the timer for 8-minute rounds. And I'm going. Rich Castro, who you'll often see me post, Richie and I will have 30-minute rounds.
Yeah.
Even today, and I'm 56. We'll be at the gym. We'll shake hands and go. The timer will go off. Everyone else will break and go to find a new partner. And Rich and I'll roll through the break.
Yeah.
We will not stop rolling for 20 to 30 minutes, and Rich could verify this. Now, you could argue, are you going full speed? No, we're not.
Mhm.
But we're going the same speed everyone else in the room is, and we're not taking a break. That kind of preparation is so much better for me and translates to an actual fight at 56 years old. That is the best conditioning I could be doing. The last thing I'll say is when you grapple, you have to scale the force you're using to your partner. The things we're doing are dangerous,
Mm.
but the goal is to not hurt my partner. When I learned police use of force in my mind, I said, okay, someone balls up their fist and swings at me. They're in intermediate resistance. They're showing an intent to do harm. I can just punch them. How hard should I punch them? As hard as I can every time, right? That was my mentality. But the reality is now the person's drunk. They can barely stand up and they throw a punch and they're lunging everywhere.
Hmm.
It's ineffective. Now the person's 67 and you're evicting them from their house and they're emotional and they smack you in the face. You gonna haul back and hit that person as hard as you can?
Right.
No, you are required to scale your applications of force in the field, and you are required to get to positions where you could kill, harm, maim, break, and then as someone begins to comply, work them safely into custody. That's a requirement of the job. It's
Yeah.
not, I can't break, kill, whatever, depending on my bad guy's resistance, but certainly that is never my goal. So in grappling, I constantly put my partners in peril safely in a controlled fashion. And I even moved to a finish without injuring them. That has a direct translation to a fight with a civilian who's not showing life-threatening resistance. They haven't armed themselves. They're not trying to stab or shoot me. They're just fighting with me. And I need to get, and when I do it in the gym, the only reason my partner quits, especially as we move up the hierarchy, is because I leave him no other option. I shut everything else off through a controlled, very professional, very calm, competent application of force where Ari says, okay, I concede, and you tap out.
Yeah.
That's how that happens. That's exactly how handcuffing happens. So those are direct parallels to grappling that you have to have. I don't care how, and I'm going to be very generic right now, and I'm going to say that this could be the fault of the person leading the training. But much of Krav is screaming while aggressively hitting something. None of that translates to controlled handcuffing.
Yeah.
Now, you could be in a fight where you are just going. I've been there. I
Hmm.
don't have a problem with that. Knock that dude out if that's where you're at. I don't have a problem with that. But the reality is you're in that fight so small a time. I police in Las Vegas, Nevada. I've had hundreds of struggles,
Hmm.
mini fights with people who didn't want to be cuffed. I've punched a handful of people
Yeah.
hard in the face, like punch them like, okay, I don't care if he goes to sleep. That's happened less than 10 times.
Yeah. The grappling allows us to have a scalable option from literally from control to lethality if you need it. And scalable is what we need. And it is perfect, absolutely perfect for law enforcement. So,
There's no doubt. There's no doubt. It's got to be a heavy component. I guess the last thing I'll say on this, because we talked about PJJ earlier.
yeah.
I have guys who trained PJJ at their department. Dan Smith is one of them, and Dan's been doing an Invictus seminar. We
Yeah.
promoted him to purple belt. Dan has a background in wrestling and boxing. He has a background in PJJ. He was competent in PJJ at a level 1 or a fundamental level for years and taught it at his agency and did very, very well. He expressed to me, I would like to be on cadre to teach. I said, unless you gain a huge grappling reservoir, because it's so important to be able to, not just to do it, but to coach it, to train it, to
Yeah.
see the nuances, to lead a room. I said, I love you. I think there's no reason you couldn't get there, but you need to improve your grappling.
Yeah.
We had a very open discussion. It wasn't harsh. It just was like, that's really a goal. Yeah, I think you could get there. Not as a white belt. You're not going to work for us. You could work at your agency as a representative, and because your agency is going to make you, whether you're a white belt in jiu-jitsu or not, you're the DT guy. So I don't care at your agency. Like, I want you to train, but you're now saying, hey, I want to wear a PJJ on my chest. I want to get paid. I want to go to a class. Coach, you're going to need to level up.
Yeah.
Now, we gave him his purple belt Invictus. So a lot of people say, oh, he's only a purple belt. Well, he's a 12-year, 13-year fight guy, getting his purple belt. And I'm proud of him. At this point, even if, let's just use Dan, even if well, I don't want Dan to listen to this, think he can do this.
He
All right,
probably will. He
I'm
probably
gonna say
will.
it. Even if Dan never promoted, Dan's one of my coaches. He's a savage. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
He's fine. But I needed him to show that interest. So Dan, if you're out there, you can stop, I guess. I don't want you to, though. Go get your black belt.
Get your black belt.
Come
Yes.
on, get your black belt. Come on. But that's an example. So
okay. Yeah, Dan's a good guy. I really like him too.
Great guy.
So, yeah. So we're going to do the lion's share. So every episode, we have a little portion where I throw a question at Chad that he doesn't know about, and he gives his share on what he thinks about it. And this one's going to come from Bill, our good friend in Sparks, Nevada. And Bill says this. He says, I spoke to our IA lieutenant a while back and asked him what some of the common complaints were for use of force that he was seeing. But he replied that it wasn't necessarily any common use of force techniques he was seeing, but he had been seeing incidents that resulted in force due to lack of command presence with the current generation of police officers. So maybe a topic that I could throw your way is, do you see that command presence has differed between the generations of, say, 20 years ago and now?
yeah. Yeah, I think so. So I'm going to start this by saying, by the way, when I came on the job in 98, in the academy, they said, you're the worst ever. You're soft. You're never going to make it. Everyone's going to murder you.
Mm-hmm.
None of you are tough. Like they said, all this stuff we say about kids now. So I'll temper it a little bit with that. But
Okay.
Command presence can be directly related to confidence and directly related to how they feel about themselves physically and about their capability. I think over the years, for a number of reasons, and I have 8 children, so I have 3 daughters and 5 sons. My kids have grown up in an environment where they're on social media. Their video games are such a huge thing now, as opposed to when we were younger, or at least me especially. We went out and played all the sports my kids play on video games now. As video games become more immersive, there are kids who are getting their football fix or their basketball fix or their wrestling fix off playing the game with a headset on, and they're not physically doing it. And so I think that and they're confident in that area, like if we said, okay, well, here's Call of Duty, like they'd be super confident and they would whoop you and I. They actually would kill us repeatedly and laugh at us. But if we then said, okay, well, you have a sim gun and I have a sim gun and we're three feet from each other, they're not going to be so confident anymore. They're going to be very, very frightened. And I'm actually I recognize the danger of that scenario. And let's go back to my indomitable comment earlier in the thing. I believe I'm going to win. I know I could lose because we both have a gun and we're close, but I think I'm going to win. And I think I'm going to win because I've done this repeatedly physically. So I think one of the big differences we see, another thing that trying to make improvement in schools and in society in general, any kind of conflict is bad. I even was at a church group this afternoon and they were talking about anger management, and they said, under the inappropriate emotional response to a situation was any physical response at all. And then they had another category where it talked about taking a break and taking a walk and breathing techniques. And then I said, I got a problem with this one. I could be completely not angry and use appropriate physical stuff. I but you could, that was foreign to these people who don't fight. So in their mind, they affiliated physical violence with inappropriateness.
Hmm.
And our kids are coming from that group of people. This was a person younger than me leading the discussion who had the little chart out and made this cool little chart. And
Mhm.
I was like, I've used violence a bunch and not been angry at all. And by the way, it was completely appropriate
Mhm.
and needed to happen. And, spiritually, we use some examples of Savior and stuff, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
We go down a spiritual road. But I think our kids, these kids, and we recruit from these kids, they're being raised in an era where physical is seen as you have done something wrong, a sin, for lack of a better word, a a penalty, you've made a foul. And I think physical is perfectly appropriate at times. It should happen. Um, have you ever seen one of the New York City 1960s or 70s? They'll have the people walking around. It's like footage of people on the street, and they say,
Yeah.
"What's different?" Then they show today. It's the size of the people. They're physically different. They were more in shape, more slender.
Yeah.
They had bodies like your and I's. They weren't bodybuilders. You and I look like people in 1970 New York walking down the street. We still look that way because we're active. They were active. We have less people who are physically active. So to Bill's question, do I think that's a thing? I absolutely think that's a thing. Now, going back to tying it into this episode, what's one of the best ways to improve their conditioning, their strength, and their confidence in a short amount of time? It's grappling.
Yeah.
Because if we box them, they're just going to get beat up. If we
Yeah.
Muay Thai, I'm not saying there's not a place. We've already said build those elements in. We have to do all those things.
I believe there's a difference between a police officer who has command presence, who believes that they have a command presence, and then knows that they have a command presence. Now, what I mean by that is you come out of the academy and they give you a badge and a gun, and you're like, well, I believe that people are going to listen to
Yes.
me. But the
Yes.
problem is when, and I'm going to tie it back to this, when you run into a zoo lion and you run into a non-zoo lion out there, when you immediately go, I'm the police, do what I'm saying. And all of a sudden you get that look from them and you go, I no longer believe that I have the confidence, the skill set. I know that I am unprepared for this. And that's where that command presence, and they get crushed. And you see it. You literally see officers shrink, start to stutter, and do that type of thing. And that's because they aren't trained and they don't have that.
So to carry on with that, because this is so important, Ari, we've got to end on this. But I've got to say, the other thing is the guy can see it. The
Yes.
guy can see it.
Yeah.
Knows which guy to say, no. The more I train, the less I've had to put my hands on people.
100%.
I was never afraid. I was never scared. And I had been in fights, and I did do American football at a decent level. And I did box with my brothers and stuff and do physical stuff. It changed once I trained, and that training just comes out of me when I sit in a room or I stand up and I walk through the room, or when I lock eyes with someone and I talk to them, and it's different, and they know it's different, and they can see it. The ones who are the problem can see it. Now, the crazy guys, some of my biggest fights have been with people who are super high or mentally ill
Yeah.
because they can't see it. It doesn't matter anymore. And now we're just going to fight. But
Right.
then I'm really effective when I do that. But the hardened guys, the guys I'm training for, the guys who will take your life, who will stomp you out, those dudes know. And if they don't know when they look at you, they can feel it when you grab them.
Yes.
They feel the difference.
Well, I appreciate it, Chad. This was a good one. That was fun. If you want to contact, just going to throw this out there through Chad. He's got a website, which is c4cpjj.com. He does police training across the nation. You can reach him out on Instagram, and you just have to type in his name and it will pop up. You should go follow him. He's a good dude. And if you want to know more about the Invictus movement, about getting cops training, you can also find us at invictusleo.com. And remember the No Zoo Lions podcast, nozoolions.com. That's our website. And we're going to be releasing some merch, and people have been asking, such as mugs, shirts, patches, and stuff like that. That's coming hopefully in the next 2 weeks. And we appreciate you guys. So remember, if you have a question, send it our way, and don't follow us, lead with us. Take care.